Hello, this is Meg from Letters from Home podcast, and we have a really special guest today, and his name is Quan Huynh, and he has an amazing story. Quan, thanks for hopping on today.
Thank you for having me.
Your book's coming out. You have a book coming out, Sparrow and the Razor Wire, and I have gotten to read it, and your story is amazing. I'm so happy that we get to touch into some of your story today. And you live in Orange County, and
Yes.
do you guys have any fires or anything going on down there today? Is it
No,
clear air?
no. Yeah, I don't know about clear air, but it's there's no fires fortunately down this way.
That's good. That's really good. It's smoky here today. The air quality is almost at 300, so it's been a little bit crazy, and we're all all locked in doors with the windows, and there's no AC up here in Seattle in the homes because the moderate temperature is so moderate, so it's kind of unusual place. Well, i I was raised in Orange County, and I know part of your story has to do with being in gangs, and we'll get to that in a bit. But I mean, I was in Hawaiian Gardens. I was in Orange. I played basketball games. I was in the San Gabriel Valley League, where we would go into Watts and Compton. So I kind of grew up down there and lived in a lot of places. So as I was reading your story, so much resonated with me about they're just the general area. So um, yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing with everyone your story. So um, tell us a bit about your upbringing. Let's just get going right into your story.
Sure. Well, I grew up actually. I didn't grow up in Orange County. I grew up in Provo, Utah. Um, yeah, we settled here in the United States after the loss of our country. I was only a few months old. Um, our family is Roman Catholic, and Utah is predominantly Mormon. So I
Hmm.
think just growing up over there, being of Asian descent, Vietnamese, particularly right after the Vietnam War, and also not being part of what they call the church. I just never, like, our family never really fit in, or never felt like we fit in much.
Yeah, that must have been. So then you moved at some point to, and then that's
Yeah,
a
we
lot.
moved out here to Cali. My father got diagnosed with leukemia when I was 8 years old, and then by a couple years after that, his condition was getting worse, so he wanted to move out here to California to get close to his family because most of his family lived in Southern California. And then we settled in Orange County, particularly, what was it? We lived in Huntington Beach, in that area, Huntington Beach and Westminster area.
So what was it like for you? And so your parents, were they English speaking at all, or did you do a lot of the communication and then you had to get set up at school and all those things? Were you kind of one of the leaders, like of the home, the communicator? And
No, actually, my mother and my father both knew English from Vietnam. They had went to school and knew English. So my father worked as he worked in the coal mines, but then he also created the Vietnamese Refugee Association in Utah. He helped a lot of the Vietnamese refugees co coming to the United States
Hmm.
settle in a new homeland. So he helped them with doing their social security, their paperwork, things like that. So he had already, as a little boy, I remember going with him in car rides to neighboring states, like to
Hmm.
Colorado, Wyoming, like the other end of Utah, whatever, for hours on end. And I didn't understand, like, "Well, Dad, why are you doing this for? You don't even make any money for this." But I didn't understand the significance of what he was trying to teach me at the time. He's like, "No, we're doing this for our community. These are people that we have to help."
Hmm.
Yeah, so, but then his condition got worse. Like I said, we moved out here um, to Southern California, and uh, he passes away when I was 13, leading up to our
Oh,
first communion. Yeah, like I think even the weeks leading up to it, my mom had said, you know, your father's going to pass away. The doctor said this, and in my mind, and in my belief of my faith at the time was, you know what, this is going to be our very first communion. I'm going to pray to God that day to let my father live, um, and of course he's going to have to grant that prayer. So the morning of my first communion, which also happened to be Mother's Day. I woke up and my younger sister tells me that my father had died the night before. So that devastated me. And then in my mind at that time, I thought, you know what? There must be really something wrong with me because God intentionally killed my father just so that he wouldn't have to grant my prayer. And I really believed it. And I saw it affected my younger brother and younger sister profoundly, but I didn't really understand how much until later on um, when we were able to talk about it when we are much older now.
wow. That you were just 13, you said, when your dad
Yeah.
passed. How that must have been so, so hard. How did your mom handle that? And were you able to verbalize? I know sometimes it takes till we're adults to even verbalize what we were feeling or thinking
Yeah.
at that time. Was she able to communicate with you about that? Or
No, I don't think we ever really talked about it. Like we never processed it. It was just something that we just shoved into a dark corner, just like, okay, oh, if only your father were here, or something like that. So we still just went through the motions and showing up to mass each week. But to me, you know, God had died. There's no such thing as a as faith or a God in my life.
hmm,
Um, yeah, we just went through the motion. So I think it wasn't until like 25 years later when I was doing a life sentence in prison is when I began to properly grieve his death and begin the process of healing from his death.
wow. Well, I'd love to get to that down the road because that's so much of our relationship with our parents. For me, for sure, it just shapes your whole life. Like I'm 53, and it still is a huge part that
Mm.
formative relationship. So, what was it like for you, Quan, in school? Then, how did you adapt in school? What was your friend situation like? How did you do there?
Well, I've always been an introvert, so you know, I love reading books. So that's where I just found my escape. It's just in reading books, in writing. In school because I already in Utah, I didn't feel like I fit in. When we came out here to California, um, a, a vast majority of the Vietnamese didn't speak English too well, and of my peers, so they poked fun at me. They said, "I'm not Vietnamese. I must be whitewashed." So it was like both ends of the of my peers. It didn't feel like that I really fit in. Um, so I would go into high school, you know, there's all these emotions going on just from not properly grieving my father's death and not just knowing my place in the world. And I just tried to do the best I could and just sticking my head down and just trying to do schoolwork and just be what I thought could be a good kid like anybody else.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, there were friends that I gravitated to that had older brothers that were already getting into trouble, and these kids to me seemed cool because they had cars and they could drive us around. So those are the role models I began to look up to. Um, and few years after that, by the age of 17, I was already arrested for the first time. We went into juvenile hall, my brother and I, and a few of our friends, and one of my friends had ended up running into a house and shooting three kids that said that they were skinheads, and our group didn't get along with them, and um, we we were they tried to give us they had tried us for three attempted murders and they gave me conspiracy to commit murder. So at 17, I was already facing 45 years to life. But they gave us a deal. I received 7 years. I did a couple years in the California Youth Authority. I got out, but by that time I was even more angry, um, more disconnected from the world, and I just felt like I don't have a place in it.
Wow, that's so much. So at 17 was the first time you were, you I look at your face right now. You seem like such a gentle spirited person,
Mm.
and people tend to think of, if we somebody commits a crime, there's some terrible person, but I don't think of it like that, because we're all the same inside, right? We all have the same dose of sin nature. We all are made in God's image. And I guess if you can take us back to when you were 17. So you were 17 and you went through, I'd love to go into a little more of that day. You were out with your brother and his friends, and
I was working at the a Subway um, at the time, and my brother came to me that evening, and he said that the skinhead kids at a local continuation school near our school had called and threatened my family, um, and they said, we're gonna come kill you, we're gonna like
wow.
you damn gooks, we're gonna come in the house and kill you all. My brother picked up the phone, was talking to them, and they're talking crap back and forth, and then he realized he knew who it was. He knew which guys it was. So he came to my work with a couple of my friends. One of my friends, by that time we were in high school, we had our own little group that we used to like to hang out with, and my friend, he had a 22 caliber handgun that he carried around with him. We found that on the streets. We got that off the streets, and it was just something that we used to carry around now. Like, okay, now this is our little group, and now we're cool because we have a gun, and everything out of our mouths at that time was, okay, well, if someone has problems with this, we'll just pull a gun out and we'll shoot them up or whatever. Not knowing damn well none of us had ever shot a gun before, none of us had even held a gun. My friend just had that one, and when that day happened, they asked me if I knew if I could find out where they lived. So my coworker, she knew some of the skinheads, so she drew me a map of where the supposed ringleader lived. Um, I gave the map to my brother and my friends, and they said, "Okay, we'll be back tonight when you get off to pick you up." So I got off at 10 o'clock. They did not come back. When I got home, I found out that they had actually found the house. They had stopped at an arcade near my house, and they got somebody else in the car with them that knew exactly where they lived. Um, and he took them there, and then my friend actually went up to the house, knocked on the door. When they opened it, he ran inside and shot three people. Fortunately, all three people survived, but within a couple weeks, we were all arrested, and yeah, that began my journey of multiple arrests after that.
So did you feel charged by, like, it sounds like you're like, what, like, protection, like, I got to protect my family, and I got to save the day. I got to be the man of the family, or I got to step up. I'm going to stand for my brothers here and for my friends, like your buddies. Do you think that's kind of what was driving you, or just
Oh
anger?
yeah,
What was?
yeah. Well, I mean, it goes back to a major incident when I still lived in Utah. I think my brother and we were like, I was 8 or 7 years old, and he was like 6 or 5. We were playing with our GI Joes in the creeks. It's like every year after snow melt, all the water comes down out of the mountains, and there's these like big creeks. So my brother and we had this little game we like to play with our GI Joes. We get our popsicle sticks and we tie it together and make a raft out of it. We can put our GI Joes and they can float down the river, and we just follow. So it's like rapids. And that summer, there were some older kids at the top of the nearby at the creek, but they were on the other side of a fence. So they started talking down to us like, "Hey, get out of here, get out of our country." Um, and my brother and I think they just the fence looked so big and they seemed so far away. um, we said, go ahead, try to make this. And the kids jumped the fence and started chasing us. They also had some adults there with them. I don't know if it was their dad or their uncles, but there were some adults that were cheering them on while they were chasing us down. And I dropped some of my G.I. Joe figures. So my younger brother stopped to pick them up. And they came and he stood up to try to fight him. And they punched him and he shoved him to the ground, put dirt in his mouth. And I just stood there and watched. Um, and then we go home, my brother with dirt in his face and his mouth, and both of us crying. And then I had told my dad, like, hey, this is what happened. And he said, like, where were you at? And I said, I was there. He goes, you stood right there and let that happen to your brother? Like, how could you do this? You always have to protect your family. This is your younger brother. You always have to protect them. So that is where that belief was like, hey, after that, I never wanted to disappoint my father or my family ever again. So I would go above and beyond to protect my brother and him, me. That was just, we were just very close like that. And we were always protective of each other after that. So, yeah,
Wow.
so when he came that night to the subways, it wasn't even a thought of my mind like, oh, we shouldn't do this. I was like, how dare these guys call our house and threaten my mom and threaten my sister, and we have to protect our family. So I felt justified in it. But then when I was arrested, there was a part of me that also made excuses to say, wait, I should never have been arrested. I wasn't even there at the scene of the crime. I didn't do anything. How did they arrest me? And the mentality of somebody in prison, or just even a lot of people in general that don't want to make own or take responsibility for choices. Um, and just make excuses or justify everything. And that was me. That was like classically how I was at the time.
Wow. Wow. Well, that's a crazy way to start. And you weren't even there at the scene. And I'm guessing something, and you felt also a little bit defeated, like, and
Hmm.
who's looking out for me? Who's I better take matters into my own hands, or just you said you were in a gang, and I'm guessing, I know there can be a really strong, and now we're not encouraging people to be in gangs, but there can be a strong brotherhood. And did they did you feel like they had your back? And then how did things keep going from that point once you start? And I just want to say, for people that are popping in live, thanks for being on here. I'm having a little trouble finding comments, but go ahead and feel free to comment or ask Quan a question or say anything, and I'll as I see it, I'll share it with him too. So
Yeah, so it was after that first arrest inside juvenile hall and the county jail is where I would have to say that's where my criminality deepened, and that's where I took up a lot of the gang values of the gang members around me. Um, I did about 2.5 years, and these guys were like, we were together at juvenile hall. A lot of us were together at the county jail, and then a lot of us were ultimately went to the California Youth Authority together. So we all kind of already knew each other. These were my only friends by the time I got out. So these are the ones I end up hanging out with, or friends that I knew at the county jail that had gotten out that kept in touch with me. It was just seemed natural. Okay, these are my friends now because I get out. My friends in high school, um, I felt uncomfortable to talk about, yeah, I went to jail. People looked like, oh my God, this guy just got out of jail. Um, so it felt a
hmm.
lot more comfortable around uh, people that I knew in prison. And these people that I knew in prison, these friends, are the same ones that later on we formed our own gang.
Do you think there's an just what you're saying makes me sad, in the sense that with so many Christians in the world, that I feel like you should have had, and I'm sorry you didn't have, a group of people that you felt loved you in spite of any wrongdoing. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I'm sad that you don't have that, and that's somewhere we need to grow in the church for sure. So then you were in juvie for a while, and then it led up to kind of more of a bigger event for a
Yeah,
longer stint in
yeah.
jail.
Yeah, so after that first arrest, I was arrested a couple more times after that, running with the gangs, getting uh, pulled over with guns and other things and violations. And then I got out in 1998, um, and I did what I tried to do best. Okay, well, I'm gonna try to go back to work. I'm gonna try to go back to school, and let's see just what can happen right in my life this time. Um, I ended up working at the Gallup organization, and that year became their 1998 Interviewer of the Year. I was able to do exit interviews for like people like Microsoft, where their employees were leaving, their engineers. So I got to be one of four interviewers nationwide that got to do that study.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was really cool. Then I got to do several other studies, and those ended up giving me the Interviewer of the Year award. Then they asked me if I'd be interested in taking a management position
Hmm.
uh, with them. So I thought, you know what? Finally, for once in my life, things are gonna go right. Uh, this is the big break that I've been hoping for my whole life. Um, I took the interview. The interviews at Gallup are based entirely on your personality. So it's like, what do you think about when you drive home at night? What color do you think of when we say this word? Or like all these weird questions I've never been asked. So I went through the interview, and about a month and a half, 2 months later, they came back and they said, Quan, we're sorry, but you are not a fit. And there's
Hmm.
just those words. That's just the language that they use there. Like when they're talking about job placements and positions, is people are not a fit. But that doesn't mean that I'm not a fit with them or anything like that. But for me, it just touched on that deep part of me that never felt like I fit in. Um, the news totally crushed me. I didn't tell anybody um, that. Yeah, I didn't tell anybody that I was turned down for this, and from there I just bottled it up, and within a week and a half, uh, I went to a nightclub with some of my gang associates. I brought my gun along. Um, we went inside the club. When I came out, I found out that some of my friends had gotten in a fight with a a different group of a different gang, and for me, I said, you know what? Let's find out where they're at. Let's follow them. And I orchestrated um, an ambush where we followed them for like 20, 25 miles on the freeway. And then I ultimately, when I saw that there was no cars around, I pulled down a window and I shot into the car. And I shot and killed one man by the name of Minuin and injured a couple others in the car.
What was going through your mind at the time?
Um, So leading up to that, like I always had this tendency when things are bothering me or when I'm not feeling good inside, you know, I could call up one of my gang friends, and it's like I don't sit there and say, okay, I got in an argument with my girlfriend today. I need to talk about it. It's more, hey, what are you doing? Let's go to the pool hall or something. But then each of us will bring a gun along or go in there and just look for trouble. And then because looking for trouble meant here's an opportunity for me to take out everything that's going on inside of me onto somebody, like to release these emotions. It was a very unhealthy way of processing emotions, not even processing, but just venting. But that is just what I believed. Okay, like it was so it became so bad where I never even once in a million years ever thought I was angry because I thought an angry person is one that screams and yells. But I realized it wasn't until years later in prison I go, man, I was probably one of the most angry people in the world, and I
Hmm.
didn't know that just because I stuffed it into the corner and it came out in the most lethal and deadly way possible. So in my mind at the time when the shooting happened, it's more okay. I may feel like a failure in this part of my life, but in the gang. in front of these people, and this is how I could alleviate and I could feel like at least I'm not a loser over here on this part of my life.
Right. Where was your family? Where was your mom in this and your brother? Did you have a relationship? And what was their response? I know we'll get into what happened after that big, big, big day when, yeah, all this came down. But where was your mom and your brother at in your heart and in their
Uh,
lives?
my brother was very close to me still, but I think by that time I was so steeped into the gang life, and he would tell me, um, you shouldn't be around this, but then yet like those were still our circle, those were still our group of friends, but um, so he was always there. My mother was just, she tried to do her best, but I wasn't listening to her. Like, I remember several times she had visited me when I was younger inside the California Youth Authority, and her thing was always just, you know what, um, let's just pray, or why don't we pray? And I remember one of my most angry conversations with her. I told her, like, what do you mean pray? There's no such thing as a God. Like, why do you continue to talk about this God in your life? I go, so it was me being angry at God and her and the world. So it became this relationship where she's there. I know she loves me, but she can't tell me what to do.
Right. Um, sorry, I'm writing. I'm doing all the things. So I'm just uh, writing your little quotes to put down here. So to catch people up with your story and whoever's listening now. Thanks for joining us to hear Quan's story. Quan, I just can't get over the sweet demeanor that you have, the disarming demeanor, and we're all humans and we get caught up in things sometimes, right? We get caught up in things, and you got caught up and just and I'm guessing too, without your father around, you were left more to your own devices. And then, pride gets in there too. I don't need to listen to my mom. I mean, because you had this strong group of friends in your gang. And so to veer from that, like what were you going to do at that point? It would have taken a strong man and conviction to get away from that. You just didn't see something different at the time. So how did that day change your life? Like what happened after that? After that day in the where you shot into that window?
Um, well, I was arrested within 5 months after that. I
Five
tried to,
months.
yeah,
Wow,
it took
that's a
about
lot.
5 months it was a gang investigation. Um, yeah, it took about 5 months. Um, then
Did
I
they not
was,
know it was you? I mean, because if someone usually things like that don't. I thought they happened quicker, but maybe you
yeah,
know.
they didn't know, they knew it was our group, but they didn't know
Oh,
who was involved in our group or what car, what person. So it was an investigation they had. Um, And then I was arrested. 5 months later, they tried me for the death penalty.
hmm.
And yeah, they said it was like special circumstances of lying in wait and for the benefit of a street gang. It was like they do all the enhancements at me. Um,
How
by the
old were you
time,
then?
I'm
Wait,
sorry,
how old were you then? When you were being
I was 24 by that time.
24. Okay.
Yeah, I think I was 24 during that time. Yeah, I was about 24. Um, and but because I had already got rid of evidence and I lied at trial, I coached witnesses. I was ultimately found guilty of second-degree murder, and I was sentenced to 15 years to life, which at the time in California meant the same thing as a death sentence because they had not paroled uh, any life-term prisoner since like 1977, and it didn't look like it was going
Wow.
to change anytime soon. Yeah, yeah. So that was like with the mindset I went into prison. I go, oh, this is a life sentence. It doesn't matter if it's 100 years to life or life without possibility of parole, or 15 years life. I'm not going home in 15 years, so I'm gonna end up dying in here.
Wow. Yeah, I'd love to know what you were thinking at that time, and also, did you what were your buddies going through at the time, and did any of them end up in jail as well, or was this all on you because you had the gun?
It was only me that was charged. Um, so yeah, nobody else was arrested on the case. Um, I just went into prison with just the mindset, okay, um, if I'm gonna die in here, I'm gonna live it the way I want to live. So prison rules, I didn't abide by them. I basically felt I'm just going to do what I want to do, um, and I'm basically never admitting that because the jury did not find me guilty as the shooter on 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 the case. So I told myself I'll never admit to being the shooter, and hopefully the
Hmm.
law changes or my appeal goes through and I could go home someday. But I just knew in the back of my mind it's not going to happen. I'm most likely going to die in here, and so I'm just going to live my life the best I can.
Where was God in your thinking at that time when you first were there? Was there, and how are you, how were you feeling about what you had done? Were you feeling,
I'm
uh,
I'm I'm ashamed to say there was no God in my life at that time. There was no sense of remorse. It was more, you know what? There's no such thing as a God, and these guys had it coming. I justified it. I said if it was my life or theirs, um, and just a lot of the continued lies that I told myself of how why this had to happen.
I hear you on that, and it's interesting that scriptures say that sin can blind us and there can be a veil over us until our hearts turn to the Lord. And for me, that's one thing that helps me just look at people with compassion. When we have the Lord in our lives, it's a different scenario, and that must have been so hard. So, what uh, can you just share with us what uh, the parts that you can? What was it like to be in jail? It sounds like you felt a bit hopeless, but as far as just coming in the new environment and the dynamics of people, like I've never, we've helped out with prison ministries here and there before in the past, but I've never been in jail as a prisoner. How did that feel? And can you walk us through that?
Um, yeah, I could kind of give you a general idea. I mean, prison is split up by race. So
Oh,
the whites will be here, the blacks over there, the Asians over here, the Hispanics over there, and then it's further divided by the gangs inside the races. Um,
hmm.
so for me, it was okay. I know where my place is. I'm with the other Asians in here, and particularly the other Asian gang members, and we're the ones that will be running the show for the Asians inside prison. And so each of the gangs have their control of their groups. So that was just for me. This is how I'm going to live my life. I'm going to live up to this label that I believe of myself, that I'm a gang member and that I'm violent and that I know the hustle. So all these things tied together, uh, and that's just the way I lived for was at least 10 years of my prison sentence.
Wow. Um, for 10 years, that's incredible. So, I mean, that's a long time. Were you by yourself in your cell? Did you have a cell person? And I didn't know that there was a lot of free time. So, or is it like the meal times or the exercise times where you could go talk with people?
So it depends on the prison that I was housed at. Like the first prison I went to, Pelican Bay, it was a lockdown prison, so it's only two people per cell. Later on, as I dropped in points to a lower level, then I lived in a dorm setting. Mm. The last prison that I paroled from, Solano, we lived in a dorm settings where it's 12 people per dorm, but there's no door, so we can walk out of our dorm and walk into another dorm. Um,
Oh,
yeah, so it's pretty wide open.
hmm. It's definitely not that. Doesn't sound like the idea that we get for movies.
Yeah, movies they'll usually show you the high security prisons of, just a two-person cell. And there's a lot of prisons still like that. But then some of the lower level ones where they house where people were what they considered a less security risk. Um, like the prison I was housed at, the last one, Solano, that prison was known as the graveyard for lifers because those are lifers that had been in
Oh,
prison a long time already, and that's where they're going to be until they died because it's nobody was paroling.
wow. Well, you are not in a jail right now. Oh,
Whoops.
I think you turned off your camera.
I was trying to get this. There it goes. There's a
Oh,
little smudge right here on the
oh,
thing. I'm sorry.
yeah, yeah, the old smudges. I see in your beautiful living room, and so you had 10 years of just living living in prison as is, unremorseful, just immersed into this life. Like, I guess this is my life, and how can you bring us to how you got out and that
Yeah.
sort of thing?
Um. So even in prison, I still enjoyed reading books. Um, I was known as a bookworm. I was known to have at least four, five, or six books at my bunk at any given time and reading them all simultaneously, depending on my mood.
Is there a
Um,
library in there, or how did you, or did your
yeah,
mom
there's a
or
li
brother bring?
there is a library that you can go to check out books. Um, and then I could also get books sent in. So that's where I used to find my books. Like I like to read the Wall Street Journal, so I like to get books off of the Wall Street Journal's bestsellers list. Like usually, if a book sounds interesting,
Yeah.
because I love business and I love entrepreneurship, so I was always into books like that. Um, and then during that time, uh, so I'd still been reading a lot. And in my 10th year, it was around my 10th, 11th year, it was 2010, around there. Um, I saw, I started to see like other lifers going home around me, but these
Hmm.
men had all done like at least 30 something years in their 60s, had never gotten in trouble. So I go, this doesn't apply to me. Um, this will never apply to me. But there was a small bit of hope, like, hey, maybe there might be one day where they could change the law some more and uh, we can go home. But at that time, maybe less than 1% was getting paroled at the time.
Wow.
Um, so then um, during my book reading, then when I'm reading, I usually get fascinated by certain genres, and I got fascinated with from the business books, which led me to this book, to that book, and somehow I stumble on um, the books on the saints, like books on
Hmm.
particular saints. I started reading about like this saint or that saint, like for example, like Saint Francis of Assisi, and what drew me to these stories were um, these were men and or women that had had their fair share of failures and mistakes in their lives, but yet they went on to leave such amazing legacies. And I started to ask myself, like, why can't I also do the same thing in here? Um, it was also around that time that my niece was born, so I saw her pictures for the first time,
Hmm.
and she looked like just like a spitting image of like my younger brother. Um, my grandfather passed away, so whoops, oh, it's our little rice cooker. Um, my my grand. I'll wait for that to pass. There it goes. Yeah,
Your rice
my
is ready.
yeah, my grandfather passed away, and that was my father's father, and I started to ask myself, you know, I started thinking like, look at what my dad had done in his like 36, 37 years on Earth, and the impact that he had made. And I contrasted that with my own life because I was around that age at that time, I think. And then I was thinking, okay, look at what I've done in my life. It's all like just death and destruction and a path of pain for people. I haven't done anything. So that was also all these things mixed up together. Then with these books that of the saints that they were inspiring me, like, okay, so it's just one day on the prison yard. I stood out there by the fence and I just had this thought, like, it was right after I had done my meditations that morning. Um, I had by that time I was became like once I was fascinated with those things, I opened up the Bible again for the first time and started reading, and some of the words in there started to come alive for me. And then I asked, why, like, I was standing at the fence and said, why can't why does prison have to be punishment? Why can't I make this as a place to where I could remake myself, even if I'm supposed to die? And then I realized I could. And it was that thought, that small, subtle shift in thinking. And I remember distinctly the sun was coming up over the hills. I was able to feel the warmth from the sun.
Hmm.
On the individual blades of grass, I could see the tiny drops of dew. And up above me in the razor wire, um, I heard a sparrow chirping.
Hmm.
And I tell everyone, it had probably been chirping my whole prison term, but I never heard it. But that
Oh,
day I heard it, and that day, from that day forth, like prison was not this cold, harsh, ugly place. It became a place where I could connect with other human beings. It became a place of such solace and tranquil beauty for me. And I looked at it as like, what can I do today to make myself a better person? And every morning I remember waking up, it's always with curious wonder, like, what does God have in store for me today? What lesson can I learn about myself today? How can I further build on myself today? And that was just how I approached each day in prison. And then not only that, that's when I began the process of grieving my father's death. Um, and in understanding that, so I get fascinated with books on grief and loss, and I noticed it in other men around me. So then I created a syllabus and I submitted it to a prison psychologist, and I said, can we create a grief and loss group? Because there's men around here suffering this all the time, whether it's the loss of a
hmm.
loved one or the loss of their dreams or loss of friendships because of getting separated to different prisons. Um, and it was all around me. I saw it so prevalent. The psychologists loved the idea, and we created a group, and I got to see firsthand how else I could start to make an impact. And for once, I started to see, like, you know what, I can make an impact in this little part of the world. This is how I could begin to give back and make a difference. Even if I'm supposed to die in here, I feel I'm most alive, and I'm finally alive for once.
Wow. Wow, that's beautiful and amazing. And I mean, just to the inspiration for the title for your book, no doubt, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's a song, I don't know if you know it, it's my favorite hymn, but it's called Jesus, Lover of My Soul.
I think I've heard that.
You might want to look that one up, but it's the guy wrote it. He had lost his wife, and he was a missionary, and on he's on a ship, and while he was on a ship, it was a really bad storm, and the the window popped open, and a little bird flew all battered up onto the windowsill of his window from
Mm.
his room. I'm getting chills as I think about it, but uh, Jesus, lover of my soul, let me to thy bosom fly, while the near waters roll, while the tempest still is high. Hide me, O my Savior, hide, till the storms of life be past. So he wrote this whole hymn, kind of a similar thing where he was at a low, low, low point in his life, and God spoke to him. And I love how God changed your heart in prison and that moment, Quan, that's did you see any changes in your in how you related to people? Did it start
Yeah,
a thing, a ripple through your community?
absolutely. Yeah, it did. It did. It changed the way I viewed my community. I've changed the way I viewed the men around me.
Hmm.
It changed even the view of my place in the world and how I could affect like positive change around me. I didn't look at like people like whether it made me much more forgiving of others, but also much more forgiving of myself. Um, it became just my own journey of self-acceptance and self-forgiveness and I would have to say like self-love, like understanding and just accepting myself and just being okay with uh, yeah, I committed the most heinous thing one human being could do to another. But I realized like I was no longer that person, and I had intentionally made that horrible choice, but I was no longer that person. Um, like one thing that I put in my book, uh, one of the sentences I put in there that I put in there, I was not born a murderer, and I realized I was not born that way, and in understanding and believing in that, then I realized then I could find my way back out of this by
Hmm.
just one intentional choice at a time. Because I got down this path by taking a bunch of wrong choices, but now I could find my way back out by um, taking a bunch of right choices. And it just became, that's where it just became just such a liberating sense of freedom for me because it wasn't something that was happening to me. It was like I'm present in this moment in prison, but I feel so at peace and I feel I am at where I'm supposed to be. Like God has me in the exact place where I'm supposed to be at right now.
Wow. What did the grief group look like when you're so did they give you a room and everyone you just kind of moderated that and you just said, "Hey, I'm grieving my dad." Like how did the dynamic of that work?
We set up like because I had been involved with a couple other groups, and then like I said, like I'm the bookworm. So once I read up into grief and loss, and I wanted to create my own. I got this college textbook on running groups on psychotherapy, and just I was very fascinated with that dynamic on how to um, understand people, their responses, and especially their defensive
Mhm.
responses in not wanting to answer or how they showed up, and then the best way to still lead things. And then plus, I had the psychologist there, so um, it was more just prompts of sharing of your own experiences and getting everyone to agree. Like these are our community agreements. Everything said here stays here. Like there are certain things that we created. Unfortunately, the psychologist got transferred to a different prison, so the grief and loss group did not last long.
Hmm.
But having it made me realize that even if I'm in prison, I don't have to wait to go home to feel free. And even if I'm there, like this is what my circumstances have given me, or this is my circumstances because I've chosen to go down the wrong path. But at this moment, I can still make a difference and I can still affect change for the better, even if I'm here. I don't have to wait for someone else to create it. I could do this myself.
Absolutely. That is a beautiful thought. And I'm sure just even having that, the idea of that, maybe it was in everyone's mind. Maybe God's raised up some other ministries because of that. Or, I'm sure that there's all kinds of need. They always say hurting people hurt others, but there's so much brokenness in lives and in our lives, and I'm sure many more good groups were brought up. So how did you end up getting out of jail? Can you just
Sure.
bring us up to the present, and then I'd love to get into talking about your book.
Okay. So yeah, after that group, I was involved in the creation of um, and facilitating of a victims awareness group. Um, and then I became very fascinated with the principles of restorative justice, of healing for both sides. And I was involved in several other groups after that. And then I went to the parole board for the second time in 2015, and they told me at that hearing that we feel that you are no longer a threat to society, and that I am now suitable for parole. And that was November 2015. So um,
Wow.
exactly almost 5 years ago. This November will be exactly 5 years that I was paroled home.
Wow. Praise the Lord. What was that homecoming like for your mom and your brother? And I bet there was some really mixed emotions because you had gotten such a strong a strong relationship with the fellows in prison.
Yes, I. That's funny that you asked that because people would think, okay, that just because I went home, everything was fine. But I found like there was for me in the California prison system when a life-term prisoner is found suitable, it takes 150 days for them to get cleared. They have paperwork. The
Hmm.
governor has to sign off on it. They have to make sure my parole plans are in order, everything to get set up. So I realized this is my 150 days to grieve every single one of these friendships that I'm going to be leaving behind, like many of them perhaps forever. And that's how I approached it. I
Hmm.
tried to be present each day because I go, I will not be here 5 months from now. And then when it came down to 4 months from now, and I tried to continue to be, but I also saw on the flip side, my friends that were going to be left behind, they weren't able to deal with it, and they already knew they were going to lose me, and they didn't deal with it well, so it became like, they um, started to avoid me, or they started to make excuses. Like one in particular was an amazing human being, but I I told him, like, you have such an amazing story of what you're doing in here to help men around you. um, I go, why don't you share with me like your story? And so I could put something together. I'd like to write something and give it to your family just to contrast with your story back then and what you're doing now. And he said, okay, I would love to do that. But he never sat down with me. And then I finally had to call him on it. And it was more, well, it's just too painful. And for me, it was very disappointing because he could teach others how to be their best selves. But when it came time for him to apply, for time for him to look himself in the mirror, um, he 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 did not. Yeah, unfortunately, he did not. He was not ready to take that step, and I think he's most likely going to die in prison.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure what you went through in your own personal, if you think of a whole decade of feeling hardened within and not even knowing the difference, you know, I- I'd like to believe God's big. God's big, and he's working in your friend. Are you able to communicate with any of your buddies, or do you are you able
Yeah.
to visit, or how does that work?
Well, because I work for a nonprofit that goes into prison, I really can't communicate with them in letters. They can
Hmm.
call me. Um, so I have an account set up so it just pays for them to call, so they could call me on the phone. But yeah, my a couple of my friends still call out to me, but that friend in particular doesn't call. I'll ask him, does he need anything in the care package? He always says, no, I'm fine. So I usually have to send my package to someone else and just ask them to give some extra stuff over to him, like bring him some coffee that I know he always used to like to drink, give him some little treats that I know that he liked, and just put that extra in the package for him.
Which is very sweet, Quan. How do you um how can people like me who don't I don't have any family members that I know of in jail right now, you know, what is a way I can or people can help people that are in prison? I know my church has a prison ministry, and one of my other episodes, a lady, she's been preaching in jails and going in, and she's gone to the Philippines and all different places. But how can we help, and what is most needed to help?
Oh my goodness. A very simple, well, I don't know if it's simple because it's draining, but a very dramatic way that you could, people that don't have loved ones in prison, um, but would like to volunteer to go volunteer with organizations that
Mhm.
are going in, and it makes a huge difference just to see like people coming in from the streets that still care. Um, there's several organizations that do that. Um, Other ways could be even out here for men and women that have come home with criminal histories. Like if be part of the advocates to fair chance hiring, for second chance hiring.
Hmm.
A lot of them come home and just because they were in prison, they're basically written off. Oh no, we can't hire them, or no way. What if this person, oh, he went to prison for a robbery. What if he robs this place? Or worse, like yeah, like what about me? Quan went to prison for murder. What if he kills us here? So I think just become open and get into proximity of people that have been incarcerated and hear their stories. And I think you can see every single one of us that have experienced incarceration are just other human beings that just want to be given another chance and be accepted again, or at least feel like they're accepted. Because I know, like, yeah, when I first came out from juvenile hall, I knew, okay, um, I'm not gonna be able to get a job anywhere that I want because they'll run a background check and I can't get a good job anymore. And or if people knew that I was in prison, they wouldn't want to be associated with me. Um, so I think just having space and provide a space for people to feel love, like a community that will still support them.
Absolutely. That's so needed. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And um, your book is dedicated. Can you say what your book's dedicated at the beginning?
Yeah, I it's dedicated. It says for the men I left behind. Um, that's what I wrote in there. And it's the book is written for men that are doing long or lifetime sentences, and I'm sharing with them how I came to my own sense of freedom years before I was paroled from my life sentence. And it actually went live today. So yeah, it went live this morning,
Yay!
and every book that is purchased this week, I'm going to match it, and I'm going to be donating it to someone that's incarcerated.
I just ordered mine this week. I was so excited. I
Oh,
was waiting for it to come, and I'm really really excited. And of course, people can buy this great book on Amazon. And I think sometimes people write books to write books so they can say they wrote a book and stuff like that. But when you read Quan's book, you see his heart. Just like right now, you can see his demeanor. He's a man changed by God and trying to make a difference with his life. And I you can find his book on Amazon and Kindle. And what else, Quan? Where else can people find you? What would you
they can
like?
find it on Audible. They could find it at Barnes and Noble, and I think even small independent bookstores. Some of them have already picked it up. People can just find me by looking me up on any of the social media or even on my website. It's all Quan X Huynh. So just my first and last name with the X in the middle. Or if it's easier for, because I know like my name is not that easy to spell sometimes for people, they could also just look up Sparrow in the razorwire.com and it will point right to my website too.
Yes, and Quan, can you we'll put those in all the links and all the places. This should be live on YouTube right now and in Letters from Home podcast, Facebook group, and on my Letters from Home Facebook page. So we will drop the links. There's a problem right now with the comments I'm seeing, but if you have any questions for Quan, put them in the comments. Any ways you want to help, or um, is there any other way that we can help you, Quan, in your ministry and what you're doing?
Yeah. Where are you at exactly, Meg?
Oh, Seattle.
Seattle. Okay, that's um. I know if there are any of your listeners that are either from Hawaii or from Oregon that are already working with any prison ministries, I've been asked by a, a pretty generous donor. She wants to donate a large uh, um, book donation of my books to go into prisons in those prisons. So yeah, if they could connect with me and say, hey, I have a way, or we're an organization that already works with the Oregon prisons or the Hawaii prisons, um, then I could reach back out to her and she'll, I think she wants to give a pretty significant donation of my book to those prisons in particular because she has homes in those states. So I don't have that. I don't have that way right now. Like right now, we're doing it through Defy Ventures, which already is working like 7, 8 different states. But unfortunately, they're not doing anything with Hawaii or Oregon.
Yeah, and you see he's got the virtual book launch as well. And Quan, you were telling me when we were talking a few weeks ago that Brene Brown reached out.
No, Brian Stevenson.
Oh, Brian
Brian
Stevenson. Oh,
Brian
sorry.
Stevenson. The one I wrote Just Mercy.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
He
He wrote a
reached out.
blurb for my book. Yeah.
How did that happen? How did that come about? I thought that was interesting.
I actually was on a panel to speak for to be the voice of the formerly incarcerated, and one of Brian Stevenson's producers for the movie Just Mercy was also on the panel with me. So we just, as I shared my story to the panel and we spoke, him and I just connected. So him and I just stayed in touch, and then during COVID, we were still communicating back and forth. And during COVID, I said, "Hey, I finished my book. Would you like to check it out?" And I sent him the electronic version, and he got it, and he put it into Brian Stevenson's hand, who felt moved enough to write a blurb and support my book.
That's great. Yeah, and if you want to put that in the comments too, that'd be great. Well, Quan, thank you so much. I know there's so much we could talk about. You clearly are a man who's been changed, and God's using you to give back and to make
Mm.
a difference. And I hope that today's story will help Letters from Home podcast group make a difference as well. This is Meg Gleesner, and thanks again, Quan Huynh, for being a guest on our show. And this is, yeah, we'll end the episode. And thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for having me.